Hello BookTube, this is a quick check-in from LA, from Los Angeles. After having completed my Dante project, my 100 videos project, I am now thirsty to move on to my next project, and right now I have published as a community post a quick poll with three different options that I considered as Italian masterpieces that I could spend some time on and making some videos about. Not necessarily 100 videos, of course. It's going to be probably smaller projects than the Divine Comedy one, but I'm thinking of Decameron by Boccaccio, Ludovico Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, and potentially some works by Ugo Foscolo, who is another poet that I really admire. And potentially in the next months or years I could have the chance to do them all, but I wanted to see if there is more interest in one or the other. And so if you haven't done so, I would ask you if you could please look at the community post that I posted today and place your vote if you're interested. Anyway, this is as I said, a quick check-in video. I want to show you 3 books I've read, 3 books that I'm going to read, and that's it. Before doing that though, I want to do a shout out to Jordan Parsons of his homonymous channel, Jordan Parsons. He published a really thoughtful, typically thoughtful and insightful video today about the way that we relate to BookTube, in particular in this so-called corner of BookTube, where we don't have huge followings or huge subscribers. We are not professionals, and I love the thoughtfulness of the video. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it. And as usual with Jordan, it's very concise. It's only 10 minutes, which is something I'm completely unable to do being Italian. But I love the fact that he was reflecting on the nature of this type of communication, which is community communication through videos, which, let's face it, it's a little weird. It's a little bit weird, at least to me. I don't know if this is a matter of age, because probably for very young people this is not weird, but I don't think so. I think for any human being to tell your family, okay, I'm going to do a video, sit down in front of the camera and record the video in order to communicate to other human beings, is just a little bit weird. You get used to it, of course, but Jordan was reflecting about the negatives and positives, and in the negatives, clearly we have the risk of narcissism, especially in this day and age where everyone is a narcissus, right? Looking at our image reflected. It's a risk, of course, that is embedded in this type of instrument. But and so I think Jordan's message and video at least reminded me of being particularly alert about this risk. That's all. Of course, there's many positives. This community is one direct example, and the fact that as long as you can do something that is good and useful to other people, from pure entertainment to useful in terms of information, to even inspiring, which is even better, to somebody else, and get the same type of benefits, information, some entertainment, or even inspiration for your life. And I've received all of these in my experience with BookTube. Then it's absolutely great. You can find that type of balance. So that's enough of my rambling about this. I want to move on to the titles of books I've read and I will read. So I've read 2 books by one of my favorite science fiction authors. In fact, my favorite living science fiction author was Robert Silverberg. The first one is Thorns, which was written in 67, I believe, and it's a very bizarre novel of science fiction where Silverberg imagines something like a Simon Cowell personality, who is an emotional squid, he calls him, somebody who is basically using other people's emotions for audience, for reality TV. and he thought about that in '67, Silverberg, which is great. And he's organizing a reality TV, including and bringing together two peculiar characters. The first one is a spaceman, a human being who went to space and came back damaged because he was taken by aliens, and they made some surgery on him, so that today he looks really ugly and deformed. In fact, the image on this cover is absolutely hideous. I don't like this cover because that's not how I imagine the character, but we can almost think of this story as very, very loosely as the story of Beauty and the Beast, only in a science fiction key, because the other person, the other character, is a woman, and she is a girl who, with new science fictional technology, which was science fictional in '67, she has been able to give birth to 100 children while remaining a virgin, thanks to in vitro fertilization and technologies that today are commonplace, but back then in '67. So this is a part of the story that hasn't really aged very well. But these two characters come together. What's beautiful about Silverberg is the writing. He writes really well, and he's full of literary references because he's a science fiction author who majored in English. I think he had maybe even a PhD in English literature and world literature. The references that he includes are really interesting for a book lover, for somebody who loves the classics in particular. The same applies to The Masks of Time, the other book that I read by Robert Silverberg, and I would put this one in my top 3 Robert Silverberg books I've ever read. I've read, I think, something like 16 or 17 so far. He was a very prolific author. And this one is, I'm going to read from the back. The year is 1999. The book was written in '68. So, of course, it suffers a little bit from the zeitgeist of '68. There is way too much sex and sexual references and allusions. But even if some of the things are really not aged well, it's still, I consider it a masterwork. The year is 1999. The century is about to turn. The civilized world is prosperous but tense with fear about the still existing possibility of a major war. There is a hysterical conviction that the world will come to an end with the arrival of the new century, like there was in 999 for the arrival of the millennium. Into this situation floats a creature calling himself Vornan 19, and he literally floats. And the part that I love being Italian is that in the introduction, in the first pages of the book, this Vornan 19 creature, he looks like a man. He's basically a naked man, young man. And the way he appears on the world stage is by gliding over the Spanish Steps in Rome, gliding over the Spanish Steps and landing basically in the Via Condotti area of Rome, and announcing himself as a man who comes from the future, who comes from 2999. The novel then narrates the story of a team of specialists who are in charge of trying to understand if he's just a fraud or if there's something to it. And it's such a masterpiece, a joy to read. The third book I read is Barabbas by Pearl Lagerkvist, who also won the Nobel Prize for Literature. This book was actually written in 1950. And wow, what a jewel, what a diamond of a book. It's only 160 pages in its Italian translation, but it's so powerful. It's the fictionalized story of Barabbas, the famous gospel character. From the moment we see him in the introduction, he's hiding behind some bushes, looking at the Calvary and looking at Jesus on the cross, because Jesus is dying on the cross. Obviously, he feels not only guilty because he's been freed so that Jesus could be crucified, but he's also feeling somewhat drawn to this character, to this man, Jesus Christ. And this pull, this magnetism, will be felt by Barabbas for the entire novel, without having Barabbas ever really giving or becoming a Christian for all of his life, except maybe at the very end. But the way that his life, as an ordinary life of somebody who was, let's say, a very low-level criminal in the Jewish society in Jesus' times, then he gets sold as a slave, etc. It gives you a lot of the background of what was going on during Jesus' times, and it also gives you a lot of color about the first dynamics after, in the years, in the decades after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, and the impact of this on people, on the first Christians, and on this character of Barabbas, somebody who is very selfish, agnostic, but who cannot escape. He cannot escape the presence, the very strong presence of Jesus Christ in his life. Now, looking forward, I am currently reading the coda of the magnificent tetralogy, The Book of the New Sun by Wolfe. I finished the 4 books that compose the series of the New Sun and loved it. I'm going to for sure reread it for sure. We are doing a read along, in fact, with Noah at everyone who reads it must converse, and a lot of other people, Alexa, etc. This is the Urth of the New Sun, which can be considered the 5th book in the series, even if Wolfe planned it as a tetralogy, as a series of 4 books. But later on, of course, the publisher asked him, can you write a 5th one? And I think after a few years, he accepted to do it, especially because he had some ideas on how to develop it. And some of the people who love the Book of the New Sun series say that this is in fact the best out of all the 5 books. I'm about halfway through, and I'm loving it so much. It's incredible to be inside the imagination of such a clever man like Wolfe was. Maybe what's difficult to convey is the very peculiar style that Wolfe utilizes. I don't think anybody writes like Wolfe. He doesn't write in a very direct and plain way. In fact, it's all the opposite. And many people like me, who actually love the tetralogy, have a mixed reaction when it comes to the first impact. When you first start reading this, and I think in general when you first start reading Wolfe, you wonder what's going on, what is this about? It does sometimes it doesn't make sense, but then you start connecting the dots, and so it's almost like a visual artist who is very good at very complex sketches, but you as the consumer of his art, you need to make a little bit of work. This is for sure. So it's not an easy read, and it makes you work a little bit as a reader, but it's so rewarding, so entertaining, so clever, and one of the best series I've ever read in my life. The next book I'm planning to read in the next weeks is this one. It's called Musings and Meditations. Since I'm in this Robert Silverberg love type of period, I want to read some of his non-fiction, a lot of his essays, articles that have been published in the last decades. He writes about anything and everything. His curiosity is endless, and he goes from history, especially ancient history, to science, to physics. So I'm sure I'm going to enjoy this very, very much. And finally, this book called The Growth Delusion by David Pilling, which is about economics, but it's a very kind of easy read, and of maybe 240 pages, and it's one of those popular type of style books of economics. Is not a university text at all. And what I love about the concept of this book is that it criticizes the cult of growth as almost the gospel of economics, or modern economics, especially the GDP, the gross domestic product, as the indiscussable, the unarguable and objective indicator to tell us if a country is doing well or not. And the GDP is something that was created probably around the 30s in reaction to the Great Depression, and then adjusted a little bit before the Second World War. But the question that is very important that he's asking in this book is it right that today in 2022 we are still using a century-old system to really make very important economic decisions? Now, my personal opinion is that when artificial intelligence becomes smart enough, and it's going to be pretty soon, it's going to be easier for us as a society to even think about and to take economic decisions. It's still not the case, and it's probably going to take decades before we get there. But in this moment, it's fair, and I think it's also smart, to criticize and to try to build on something, try to develop and try to upgrade or evolve this concept of gross domestic product, that or constant growth for a country that's always been the standard for the last 100 years. Why not? And remember what and the reasons why it's been created. Remembering the why. Otherwise, you just go on thinking about how, but never about why. So I think I want to join this one as well, very much. Thank you for watching. Thanks everyone, and thank you for voting or giving your preference on my little poll that I published in my community post as well. See you soon.